Hello and welcome to another episode of Podcast AI. I'm your host, Benny Fluman, founder and CEO of MATCH B2B, where we specialize in helping businesses design winning B2B customer journeys and expand into international markets. For over 30 years, I've been in the trenches of sales, marketing, and business management, helping senior executives maximize their marketing ROI and improve those all-important conversion rates. Today, we're diving into something I'm particularly excited about: how consultants can leverage audio marketing to sell without actually selling. That's right. No pushy tactics, no awkward pitches, just authentic connection that naturally leads to business opportunities. Whether you're a seasoned consultant or just starting out, audio content, particularly podcasting, has become one of the most powerful tools in your marketing arsenal. And I'm not just saying that because we've recently launched Podcast AI, our platform that transforms written content into fully produced podcast episodes. Although I must say, watching our clients expand their reach through audio has been truly amazing. But enough about that for now. Let's get into the good stuff: the psychology, strategies, and practical tips that make audio such a powerful medium for consultants. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly how to leverage your voice to build trust, showcase expertise, and yes, grow your business, all without that uncomfortable hard sell. Let's start with something fascinating. The human brain is wired to connect with voices in a way that written text simply cannot match. We've all had that experience of feeling like we know podcast hosts personally, right? Like they're our friends, even though we've never met them. That's not just in your head. Well, actually, it is in your head, but it's a real psychological phenomenon. Research shows that about 75% of podcast listeners trust the hosts they regularly listen to. That's an extraordinary level of trust when you think about it. Why does this happen? Voice communicates authenticity and emotion in ways text simply cannot. When someone is literally in your ears during a commute or while doing chores, you develop what feels like an intimate bond with them. You hear their excitement, their thoughtfulness, their genuine interest in a topic, and that's something that's very hard to fake. For consultants, this is pure gold. Think about how much of our business depends on trust and credibility. Imagine having prospects who already feel like they know, and trust you before you've ever had a sales conversation. I had a client tell me recently, "Benny, I feel like I've been getting free consulting from you for 6 months through your podcast. When I needed help with my international expansion, there was literally no question about who I'd call." That's the power of audio influence. It positions you as the trusted advisor long before any business is discussed. Now, let's talk about how to weave your services into your content without sounding promotional. The secret weapon here is storytelling. Instead of bluntly listing your services or capabilities, incorporate them into narratives. I love what sales expert John Livesay says about this. Let's call it a case story instead of a case study. People connect with stories on a deeper level than they do with facts and figures. Here's a framework I recommend. Make the client the hero of the story, not yourself. You're not Luke Skywalker. You're Yoda, the guide who helps the hero succeed. Describe the challenge the client faced, the turning point in their journey, and the resolution they achieved with your guidance. For example, rather than saying, "I helped company X increase their conversion rates by 30%, tell the story. Company X was struggling with declining sales despite increasing their ad spend. Their marketing team was working overtime but couldn't identify where the disconnect was happening. After we analyzed their customer journey together, we discovered 3 critical drop-off points. By redesigning those touch points, they saw a 30% increase in conversions within 60 days, and their marketing director finally got that promotion she'd been working toward." See the difference? The second approach lets the listener envision themselves in that same journey. They can identify with the frustration, the discovery process, and ultimately, the success. Storytelling also gives you a natural opportunity to share your why, the reason you do what you do. When I talk about why I founded MATCH B2B, I share how frustrated I was seeing brilliant companies fail in international markets simply because they didn't understand the cultural nuances of their new territories. That personal motivation makes my business relatable and human, not just another consulting firm. Related to storytelling is the delicate art of highlighting your successes without coming across as boastful. Nobody likes a show-off, but your prospects do need to know that you get results. The key is to frame client wins as inspirational stories rather than congratulatory anecdotes. Always make the client the hero of the story, not yourself. Focus on their journey and outcomes, with your role positioned more as a supportive guide than the star of the show. I find that using a structured story framework helps keep the focus where it belongs. When talking about client results, I answer these questions in sequence. What was their situation before working with us? What pain points were they facing? What did we do together? And what is life like now? For example, we worked with a mid-sized manufacturing firm that was losing market share to more digitally savvy competitors. Their sales team was frustrated because they couldn't compete on price, and customers weren't recognizing their superior quality. Together, we developed a value-based sales approach that highlighted their unique strengths. 6 months later, they have won back 2 major accounts and increased their average deal size by 22%. Notice how this highlights concrete results, winning accounts, increasing deal size, without sounding like I'm pounding my chest. The achievement feels more like a helpful example than a boast. Even better if you can include the client's own words. A quick soundbite or quote from them adds tremendous credibility. Their perspective turns what could be perceived as bragging into social proof. I have a confession to make. I'm not naturally a good salesperson. I've always hated being on the receiving end of a hard sell. So I'm very cautious about coming across that way to others. I imagine many of you feel the same way. The consultant stereotype isn't exactly known for aggressive sales tactics, is it? The beauty of podcast marketing is that it eliminates the need for traditional pitching. Instead, use your show to start conversations and build relationships organically. One of my favorite approaches is using the podcast for warm introductions. Inviting target clients or industry leaders as guests creates a natural environment to discuss their challenges and goals without any sales pressure. After spending 30-45 minutes in thoughtful conversation about their business, guests, who might be ideal clients, leave with a positive impression. No hard sell needed, just a genuine connection established. Another principle I live by is simply being helpful and human. In each episode, focus on genuinely solving a problem or teaching something valuable. When listeners sense that you truly care about their issues and aren't just setting up to close a deal, they become naturally more open to working with you. As sales coach Alan Langer puts it, sales is not a numbers game, it's a human game. As long as you're human and you're there to help them, the person will feel that and you'll have a much better chance of selling whatever you sell. This might mean freely sharing a quick tip you'd normally charge for or answering a listener question in depth. By the time you mention an offer or service, the audience doesn't perceive it as a hard sell, but rather as another form of help. A logical next step for those who need more support. Now let's talk about calls to action, or CTAs. Every marketing expert will tell you that you need them. But how do you include CTAs without sounding like a late-night infomercial? First, keep it simple. Limit yourself to one clear CTA per episode. If you rattle off a laundry list of asks, subscribe, follow, download my guide, call me, buy my course, listeners will tune out. It's far more effective to ask for one thing at a time. For example, if your episode was about a specific pain point like improving team communication, a natural CTA might be, if this resonated with you, I've put together a one-page communication framework that my clients have found incredibly useful. You can download it for free. Just visit matchb2b.com/framework. Always clarify why the listener would want to take that action. What's in it for them? When the value is evident, the CTA feels more like a helpful recommendation than a sales pitch. Second, timing matters. Deliver your call to action at a moment that feels organic. The end of the episode is often the most natural spot. After you've provided value, you can smoothly transition. That's all for today. If you found this useful and want to dig deeper, here's how we can continue the conversation. Alternatively, if something you've mentioned ties directly to a resource you offer, you can briefly note it mid-episode in a conversational way. And I dive deeper into this in a free guide on our site, which I'll share at the end of the show. The key is that your tone should remain inviting, not urgent or pressure-filled. Over time, listeners will almost come to expect your gentle CTA as part of the show's routine. And because you consistently deliver value first, they'll be more inclined to respond. Let's talk about how to structure your podcast to keep listeners coming back for more, or even better, binging multiple episodes in one sitting. The most effective strategy I've found is planning content arcs or series. Rather than each episode standing alone with no clear connection to others, build intentional sequences. For example, do a 3-part series on a hot topic in your industry, or a season where each episode aligns with a phase of a methodology you use with clients. When episodes connect or build on each other, your podcast becomes a guided journey rather than random insights. Listeners who enjoy one episode will naturally queue up the next to see the full picture. Even simply saying, "Next week we'll dive into part 2 of this conversation," creates a hook that pulls people back. Another technique borrowed from narrative podcasts is using open loops and teasers. This doesn't mean creating artificial cliffhangers. That would feel manipulative. But you can certainly pique curiosity about upcoming content. Mention an interesting case or strategy you'll cover in the next episode. Get your audience asking, what happens next? I've found it effective to reference the past, present, and future in each episode. Briefly recap the previous episode's key insight, explore today's topic in depth, and then preview what's coming next. This creates a narrative thread that makes your content feel cohesive and valuable as a complete body of work. Finally, never underestimate the power of consistency. Publish on a regular schedule so your audience knows when to expect new content. If you deliver reliably, fans will incorporate your show into their routine. That's my Monday morning commute podcast. And look forward to each release. Consistency extends to format, too. Whether it's a 20-minute solo show, a 45-minute interview, or a case study breakdown, keeping your episode structure predictable makes it easier for someone to hit play next because they know what they're getting. One question I get asked constantly is, how much should I promote my services in my podcast? The answer lies in finding the right balance between providing value and making offers. A practical guideline I recommend is the 80-20 rule. Aim for roughly 80% of your podcast content to be pure value: education, insights, stories, and entertainment, with no strings attached. The remaining 20% or less can mention your services or offers. This balance keeps your audience engaged and learning most of the time. So when you do talk about your solution, it doesn't feel excessive. For example, an episode might be 90% you sharing a framework or interviewing an expert, and in the last few minutes, you mention an upcoming workshop you're hosting. Listeners actually expect some promotion, after all. They know you're running a business. They just don't want to feel like the entire show is a thinly veiled sales pitch. Another approach is embedding promotions inside value. Tie your offer directly to the episode's topic. If your episode is about improving team decision-making, you might share a case story of how you helped a client overcome decision paralysis, during which you subtly mention the consulting methodology that achieved it. This is vastly more effective than creating content titled, "Why Are Consulting Services the Best?" Instead, lead with value topics and weave your services into the narrative as a supporting element, not the star. Remember, it's not just about what you sell, it's about how you enrich your audience's lives. If you focus on enrichment first, the sales will follow naturally. Your podcast shouldn't exist in isolation from the rest of your marketing. Instead, think of it as the top of a sales funnel, a way to attract ideal clients and begin nurturing relationships that eventually lead to business. The most straightforward strategy is turning listeners into leads by offering valuable resources that require contact information. For each episode or series, create a companion resource, a checklist, template, assessment, or guide that expands on the topic discussed. During the episode, direct listeners to a specific landing page where they can download this resource by providing their email. This moves them from anonymous listeners to known leads you can nurture. I've seen this work brilliantly in practice. One fitness podcast regularly mentions their free resources page during episodes. When listeners download these guides by filling out a short form, they're converted into leads that receive nurturing emails and eventually offers for paid programs. This podcast-to-email funnel has generated significant revenue directly attributable to their show. As consultants, we can implement the same approach. Offer a valuable resource related to each episode's topic and mention it at appropriate moments. Each new email subscriber from the podcast is a warm lead who already trusts your expertise. Another powerful strategy is mapping different episode topics to stages of your buyer's journey. Top-of-funnel episodes might be broadly educational, attracting new listeners searching for help, while mid-funnel episodes could address specific pain points or objections for engaged prospects evaluating solutions. Make sure your show notes page or website for each episode includes easy ways for listeners to take next steps, whether that's scheduling a call, joining a webinar, or accessing premium content. The podcast creates awareness and interest. Your funnel infrastructure should be ready to capture and convert that interest into action. When executed well, your podcast becomes a consistent source of pre-qualified prospects who enter your pipeline with higher trust and understanding of your value proposition than cold leads from other channels. Let's talk about one of my favorite strategies, getting maximum mileage from your podcast content by repurposing it across multiple channels. Each podcast episode represents a significant investment of time and thought. Don't let that value remain trapped in audio format only. A single episode can be transformed into multiple pieces of content, reaching different audience segments and reinforcing your message. Start with the simplest approach. Transcribe your episodes and transform them into blog articles. This makes your content accessible to people who prefer reading over listening and significantly improves discoverability. The text from podcasts adds valuable SEO content to your site. People searching for topics you discussed may find your blog post, bringing new eyes to your consulting services. For maximum impact, optimize these posts with relevant keywords and clear headlines. A podcast episode titled Client Communication Strategies might become a blog post called 5 Client Communication Strategies That Prevent Project Derailment. Beyond blogs, extract compelling segments or insights from episodes to share as social media content. A powerful quote or tip can become a LinkedIn post or Twitter thread with a link to the full episode for those interested in diving deeper. You can also compile key takeaways from recent episodes into your email newsletter, giving subscribers value even if they haven't listened yet. This cross-pollination across channels allows you to create highly targeted omni-channel content at scale without starting from scratch each time. Remember the marketing rule of 7. Prospects need to encounter your message multiple times before taking action. Repurposing helps hit that mark by distributing the same core ideas in different formats across multiple platforms. Over time, someone who first reads your LinkedIn post, then sees your newsletter, and finally listens to your podcast will feel like your expertise is everywhere. This creates familiarity and trust, making them more likely to reach out when they need consulting services. At MATCH B2B, we've actually automated much of this repurposing process with our podcast AI platform. It helps consultants transform their existing written content into professional podcast episodes, then use those episodes to fuel their broader content strategy. But whether you use tools or do it manually, the principle remains the same. Maximize the ROI of each piece of content by giving it multiple lives across different channels. Let me share some real-world examples that illustrate exactly how these principles are applied in practice. Thompson Wealth Advisors, a boutique financial consulting firm, was struggling to differentiate themselves in a crowded market. Before launching their podcast, The Strategic Investor, they averaged just 3 to 4 new client inquiries monthly, with a high cost per acquisition through traditional marketing channels, over $1,200 per qualified lead. Their approach was brilliantly simple. Weekly 25-minute episodes focused specifically on wealth preservation strategies for business owners. Each episode included one practical tip listeners could implement immediately, regardless of whether they became clients. Within 7 months, they were receiving 12 to 15 qualified leads monthly, with 65% specifically mentioning the podcast as how they discovered the firm. Their cost per lead dropped to $320, and new clients were entering the relationship with higher trust, shortening the sales cycle by 40%. What made their podcast successful wasn't general financial planning advice. It was addressing specific pain points business owners face with actionable solutions. Their commitment to teaching, not preaching, established authority without pressure. Next Level Systems offers another compelling example. They historically served small and mid-sized businesses but struggled to gain traction with enterprise clients who viewed them as too small for major implementations. After 18 months of traditional outreach, they had secured only one enterprise client, with proposals often rejected due to lack of enterprise experience. Instead of continuing the same approach, they launched Enterprise Integration Insights, a technical podcast interviewing IT directors from large companies about integration challenges. Rather than pitching their services, they positioned themselves as curious learners and facilitators of knowledge sharing. The results were remarkable. The podcast became required listening for several enterprise IT teams. Within 1 year, they secured meetings with 5 Fortune 1000 companies, resulting in 3 major implementation contracts worth over $2,800,000. Most interestingly, all these clients approached them directly after listening to multiple episodes. The key learning here is powerful. By giving enterprise professionals a platform to share their expertise, they built goodwill while subtly positioning themselves as peers in the enterprise space. Their approach of becoming part of the conversation rather than forcing themselves into it proved highly effective. Davis HR Solutions provides our third revealing case study. Despite 15 years of experience as a respected HR consultancy, 90% of their business came from within a 50-mile radius of their office. Attempts to expand through traditional marketing yielded poor results. They launched People First, a podcast focusing on progressive HR practices. Rather than general HR topics, they specifically targeted emerging issues like remote work policies, 4-day work weeks, and inclusive benefits packages. They rigorously measured which episodes generated the most engagement and doubled down on those topics. Within 18 months, they secured clients in 14 states, with 70% never having met the team in person. Their consulting rates increased by 35% due to their perceived authority in progressive HR practices. Most interestingly, their average client size increased, with several companies over 1,000 employees retaining them, previously an unattainable market segment. Their hyper-focus on forward-thinking HR topics rather than traditional practices positioned them as innovative thought leaders. As we wrap up today's episode, let's recap the key strategies we've covered for selling without selling through audio marketing. Build trust through your voice by being authentic and valuable. Focus on educating your audience rather than pitching to them. Use storytelling to illustrate your value proposition. Showcase client successes as inspirational stories, not boasts. Replace hard sells with helpful conversations and relationships. Make your calls to action feel like natural next steps. Structure your content to encourage binge listening. Maintain the 80-20 balance between value and promotion. Integrate your podcast into your broader marketing funnel. Repurpose your audio content across multiple channels. What makes audio marketing so powerful for consultants is that it aligns perfectly with how consulting relationships actually work. Consulting isn't transactional. It is built on trust, expertise, and genuine connection. Your podcast simply accelerates and scales this relationship building process. If you're intrigued by the potential of audio marketing but feel overwhelmed by the production process, I'd love to tell you more about how our podcast AI platform at MATCH B2B can help. We specialize in transforming written content into fully produced, branded podcast episodes with minimal effort on your part. You can learn more at matchb2b.com/podcastai or reach out to me directly at benny@matchb2b.com. I'd be happy to discuss how we might support your audio marketing journey. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you found this valuable, please share it with a fellow consultant who might benefit. Until next time, I'm Benny Fluman, reminding you that in consulting, how you sell matters just as much as what you sell. Let your authentic voice be your most powerful sales tool.